1. In college, I worked at the front desk for a dorm. Most of the time, it was a chill job. I worked nights and just had to help the occasional drunk student after they lost their keys. However, once a year, we had to deal with the worst of the worst. Move out. Anyone that's ever experienced move-out day knows the absolute shit show it is. During the move-out, supervisors scheduled double the people at the front desk, so I had to work during the day. Our front desk was in the main community space for the dorms. Out front of the space was a super small lane that led to the parking garage. Everyone that needed to get to the parking garage had to use this lane. My whole shift was going pretty well. Just small complaints about moving bins and our lack of resources for the summer heat. So far so good, or so I thought. Up walks this family. A mom, a dad, and daughter that were clearly annoyed. My 3 other co-workers were busy, so it was up to me to help this family. Hi, what can I help you with?
I was stung by a bee. I need some medical assistance.
Now, as a student worker, the last thing I was allowed to do was provide medical care of any kind. Couldn't even hand out a band-aid. Knowing I can't help, I reply, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. As a desk worker, I'm not able to provide medical assistance, but..." The daughter cuts me off impatiently.
You don't even have a first aid kit? Can't you just give us something to help?
I would have assumed they were worried about the mom's health, but at this point, they sounded more upset that they weren't getting their way. We don't have first aid kits because I'm not allowed to administer aid. If you'd like to get help, I would recommend walking over to health services.
You want us to walk all the way over to health services?
At this point, all I wanted was for them to leave, but I couldn't say that. There's also urgent care and hospital right off campus if you're worried about a reaction.
I'm not driving all the way over to a hospital, I just need help now. Can you call someone to help or something?
Cue the malicious compliance. Normally, I would call our non-emergency number for assistance, but this family clearly wanted quality care. Would you like me to call 911? I can see if they'll help.
Yes, do something.
So I call 911. The operator asks about the emergency, and I explain it's a bee sting. Are they allergic? I ask the mom, and she says,
Well, no, but it's hurting.
Do they have tweezers they could use to pull out the stinger? I ask the family, and to this the daughter snaps,
Why would we have tweezers?
I relayed the message to the operator and let her know the family specifically requested medical care. She sighed, clearly annoyed by this non-emergency, and let me know she sent help. At this point, my line is getting incredibly long, so I ask the family to step aside. When I tell them help is on the way, the mom asks,
What are they sending?
I don't know.
Well, I hope it's not a fire truck. That would be so embarrassing for just a bee sting.
A few minutes go by, and I can tell the mom is starting to realize she may have overreacted. She tries to tell her family they can just leave, but the dad and daughter reminded her they are already sending someone. As they wait, up comes a massive fire truck, sirens blaring. All the other families at the front desk, which is a lot because this family held up the line, turn to see what's going on. The mom is absolutely mortified. She is looking around, trying to hide behind her family. It's hilarious. She meets emergency services outside, so they don't make a big scene in front of the other families. The best part? The fire truck had to stop in the teeny-tiny lane out front of our community center, completely blocking the way into the parking garage. This means a line of cars was building up while she got her bee sting treated. With each car joining the line, she looked more and more embarrassed. Once she was treated, they came back in to get to the daughter's dorm. They walked quickly and avoided eye contact, clearly embarrassed by the overreaction. I hope they've learned to stop with the impatience and entitlement. As much as I hate calling 911 for trivial things, it was worth it to see the look of sheer humiliation on the mom's face. And I like to think the operator was looking out for me by fulfilling my malicious compliances to the highest degree. 2. This happened many years ago, and occurred over several weeks. My boyfriend at the time worked as an electrician in a factory, and had to be up very early every morning to make it to work on time. He had recently moved to a brand new apartment building and was, in fact, the first tenant to move in. Everything was going great until about 3 weeks later, when he got new neighbors directly upstairs. They were young, college-aged, where he was in his mid-20s, and they liked to party. Boy, did they like to party. Not just on the weekends, but every dang night, and they were loud. So loud that his dishes would rattle in the cabinets every single night. He went through all the proper steps to try to correct the problem. He approached the new neighbors directly, knocking on their door and politely explaining that he had to be up early to go to work, etc. Could they please turn the music down? This would be at 11 or 12 on a weeknight. They would turn the music down, but 15 to 20 minutes later it would be blasting again. He reported them to the property manager. If management did anything at all, it was completely ineffectual. Reporting them to the local police resulted in the music being turned down for one blessed night, but eventually the police just stopped responding because, as said before, this was an issue every night. So now it was time for some petty but very effective revenge. My boyfriend's favorite band was AC/DC. He had 6 speakers attached to his turntable. I told you this was a long time ago, 2 of which were woofers, bass speakers, that, when turned about 2/3 of the way up, did more than vibrate the dishes. They vibrated your whole body to the point where your heart rate was aligned with whatever song was playing, and your teeth rattled with the beat. One morning, after a particularly long and noisy night from the upstairs neighbors, my boyfriend took milk crates, free furniture, Google if not familiar, and stacked them right up to the ceiling in 2 stacks, leaving just enough room to place his 2 woofers between the top of the stack and the ceiling, with about 8 inches of space between them and the ceiling. At the time, there were no other tenants in the building, it being brand new and all. Boyfriend put his favorite AC/DC album, Highway to Hell, on his stereo and set it to repeat indefinitely. He then cranked it up, way up, and went to work. When he got home, the stereo was off, and there was a notice on his door from the apartment complex, something to do with the noise ordinance or whatever. I would like to point out again that apartment management had been completely ineffectual in ending the noise problem from upstairs prior to this. Also of interest is that the notice from the complex was just a warning, as they could have evicted him at that point. They were aware of his problems with the upstairs neighbors, so I'm assuming that's why they cut him some slack. I suspect that while they had no issue with the warning, they might have secretly been hoping he would be able to get the noisy tenants to leave. Whatever. There was no noise from upstairs that night, but the next morning, boyfriend put the same album on repeat at a lower but still significant volume. At this point, he didn't really care if he got kicked out, he just wanted to be able to sleep at night. This time, the stereo was still on when he got home and still on repeat. Never heard a peep from upstairs, and within 2 weeks, the whole building was empty again, except for my warrior boyfriend. It soon filled up with much quieter, respectful folk. Word got around about what my boyfriend had done, and for the rest of his stay there, he was known and treated like Superman. 3. I'm a 40-year-old female, and I learned landscape gardening, but due to an accident many years ago, I can no longer work the actual craft. In 2020, after 12 years of being a stay-at-home mom, I began working in the office of quite a large landscaping firm. My position was assistant to management, with Jack, one of the COOs, as my direct boss. At the time, I did mostly supporting paperwork. A couple of months later, the company hired Becky as a junior manager. She had just finished her master's degree, and this was her first real job, so she had a lot to learn and to gain experience. In the beginning, she relied on me for the paperwork and how our programs worked, and I thought we got along well, even though we were as different as 2 people can be. In spring 2021, there were some changes made. For one, our whole department moved to new office rooms, and Becky and I were put in the same office. Also, I was taken out of day-to-day paperwork to work exclusively on surveying, to get all the measurements needed to correctly bill our clients. About that time, our problems started. I'm on the ADHD spectrum, so I have habits of unconsciously fiddling or talking to myself and other stuff that unnerved her. She needed absolute quiet while working, whereas I preferred to hear music over headphones. Every time she told me something I did would disturb her, I tried to stop myself doing that, be it mumbling, listening to music while she's in the office, even drinking coffee because
Your slurping is disgusting.
coffee is hot, duh. I was not allowed to comment on anything concerning her, I'm a terribly curious person, and so on. Even though I love my job and anyone else in the company, that daily repression made me not want to go to work in the morning. It came to a head when one of our foremen was in the office. She gave him a task, he was annoyed, and I made a little fun comment that made the foreman chuckle, lightened his mood as intended. But after he'd left, she exploded on me. How dare I undermine her authority, and how unrespecting of her position I was. After all, she was a manager, junior, but who's counting? And I was merely the assistant. She went to Jack to complain about me, how she could not work with me when I was so obnoxious, yada yada. Long story short, Jack is a super chill boss. He talked to me to hear my side, and 3 days later, I moved all my stuff into another, smaller office where I've worked ever since. As I mentioned, I do the surveying for all manager projects that need it, also for Becky, and she was very particular in how the plans had to be laid out, which items had to be on them, and so on. So when I did a survey and drafted the plans, we had to have several discussions and corrections about minute details none of the other managers cared about. With everybody else, when I had a question regarding the projects, I would go to their office, see if they were free, and ask for the information that I needed. If I could not draw it from the documentation. Not with Becky, she demanded I make appointments with her to schedule meetings to talk about these issues. That dragged work in her projects to absurd lengths. Also, she would give me deadlines for finishing, and then take 1 to 4 weeks before even looking at what I had made. Then she would want to discuss that. When I was already at the next project over, it was a pain. In December 2021, we had another falling out when she questioned me about a project that I had finished in October, and got pissed when I could not immediately recall all the details. I mumbled something like maybe assembled the bill not 2 months after finishing the project, and she blew up.
How dare you tell me how to do my work? I know what I'm doing. I don't have to put up with a lowly assistant.
I left, and luckily that was the last day of work in 2021. In 2022, work started with Becky calling me to her and instructing me on how we would proceed in the future. I was not to talk to her while working unless she approached me first, or if we had a scheduled meeting. Also, I was only to talk to her about the tasks she assigned me, nothing else. And it was not my position to tell her how to do her job. Breaks were fair game, but by then my interest in making conversation with her had faded. So that's how it went. At this point, I have to mention that as part of my job, I sometimes look at the chats of work that have already been done. How much soil has been brought in, and how much of which materials have been used, to get an idea of what needs to be included in the survey. In Becky's lists, I sometimes notice typing mistakes, like the surveyed amount of square meters entered, when the volume, cubic meters, was demanded, which resulted in too high bills, which led to complaints by the client and reductions of the bill. I tried to tell that to Becky, but she stopped me before I really began, pointing out again that I had to focus on my job and not to speak to her unless addressed by her first. Okay. For other managers, I would simply have corrected the mistake after a quick consultation, but for her, nope. In the following months, I noticed a couple of these mistakes in her projects, but I just kept my mouth shut. Also did not go to Jack about it because I didn't want to appear like I was blackmailing her or something. Over the summer, I noticed more and more mistakes and how projects that had been finished in the spring had still not been billed. But somehow Becky found the time to go on summer vacation twice. I noticed undocumented items, false entries, lacking entries, and other mistakes in the lists of her projects, and said nothing. In early August, she had finally assembled the bill for one of her bigger projects that had been finished months ago, and forbade anyone to talk to her while she worked on the next. Then I received an email. The client who had received the aforementioned bill had rejected it, due to the amount of mistakes and lack of confirmability. I had been CC'd as a surveyor, but the problem was not my surveys, but that Becky had not transferred the results correctly. The client denied payment and demanded immediate correction. The sum was about 250,000 euros, money the company had been waiting for months by the time. This was serious, so I decided to break my silence and tell Becky. She saw me through the glass door, and before my hand touched the handle, she yelled, "Don't talk to me!" Well then, what's a girl to do? Wait for about 15 minutes, until my super chill boss, who's been walking his dog over lunch break, returned to his computer. Of course, he had been CC'd as well, and his roar made the walls shake. Jack went to Becky's office and tore her a new one. Afterwards, he came to me and asked me to please correct the lists as far as I'm able. In the following days, he went through all of Becky's projects, and needless to say, she's gone since September. She wanted me to do everything her way, and I tried to comply with so much crap. In the end, I complied so much it got her fired. 4. Backstory. A few years ago, I bought my first house in a medium-sized 500 to 1,000 homes neighborhood in a southern state. It had an HOA, but I actually picked the neighborhood because they had the lowest HOA dues in the city, the fewest rules, and the house was by far the nicest one I could afford in my budget. After a few weeks, I got a violation notice from the HOA telling me that I had 2 violations needing correction. 1, my lawn was not green enough. 2, my trash cans were too close to my driveway. I was thoroughly confused about number 1, as it was February, in the middle of winter, so of course my lawn was dead, like pretty much everyone else's. So I had assumed that either this was a mistake or an existing offense from the previous owner. As for the trash cans, I kept them on the side of my house, and I think when the HOA came by, my trash cans stuck out past the side wall. Less than a foot, so how dare I? I shrugged them off and continued on. Come March, I got another notice, this time fining me for both violations. Each one cost me $100, and they wanted the money in 2 weeks. I was pissed. This has made no sense, and I was not about to let them just try to get money for BS violations. So I called the management company that worked with the board to get them appealed. The lady told me that I needed to appeal directly to the board, and that I could do so in the next annual meeting in a few days. So I of course showed up to the meeting. Prior to its starting, I met with a few homeowners and learned that they were all there for similar BS violations, and were pissed off too. I then talked with one of the members of the board about the fine appeals process. He was an older guy in his 70s with short gray hair and a very worn and angry face. He asked what I was getting fined for, and when I told him, he just looked at me and said,
"You should get fined for that. Young people like you not taking care of their homes is the whole reason I got on this board. Learn to be a better property owner."
This dude was the VP of a volunteer board telling me that I did not know how to take care of my house. What a sad life. The meeting then started, and the moderator mentioned that since this was an annual meeting, we would be voting on 3 out of the 5 board members. They had some applicants to the board, and we could also nominate someone today. That's when I had the idea of how I could get my revenge. When the election part of the meeting came, I nominated myself, gave some BS speech about HOAs are not here to make money, and I wanted to serve my community. I won in a landslide, and you could see the board members getting annoyed because they had scowled during my speech. After the meeting, I appealed my violations in a very elegant way, and they agreed to waive my trash can violation. As for the grass one, apparently since I had weeds growing in my yard, like a tiny patch in the corner, they were still fining me because the weeds were turning yellow after I sprayed them. I was dumbfounded how they could get away with this, but they used a technicality in the bylaws that I had signed, so I ended up losing $100. Revenge. I will be honest, I had not expected this to work. After joining the board of 5, including myself, I was appointed secretary and had to help maintain meeting notes and review records. They specifically told me that I was not allowed to propose new policies, but I could vote on new ones proposed by the VP or president, which I later learned was actually a violation of their own rules. I voted every new rule down as long as I was in that position. I decided that my best course of action was to listen to how the others operated and look for an opening to get each of them off the board. The first opening came when the president, who literally looked like the most Karen woman ever, mentioned that she had wanted a fine for flowers that were not neutral color. Basically, if the homeowner wanted to add something like turquoise flowers, we would fine them. She apparently had a neighbor that had flowers she didn't like and wanted to use the board to stop them. It was pretty insane. I then started my revenge on her. I started a message thread on Slack, since it's how we communicated, with the other board members and asked what they thought about her policy and reasoning. After far too much deliberation, 2 of them honestly thought that this was okay. We agreed that the policy went too far. I then made a long post in the main channel telling her that her actions were not only wrong, but that she should be excused from the board. When she inevitably flipped out, I called a board meeting in the following week, and the other 4 board members voted her off for targeting a community member for personal gain. She gave a sob story about how the board was her life and that the neighborhood was like her child, but I didn't care. I convinced one of my good neighbor friends to join a little later on to take her spot. The next members I targeted were the treasurer and director, as I wanted to save the VP for last. They were actually the easiest to get off the board because they were very easily swayed by public opinion, so I made a fake account on Nextdoor and waited until spring, when most of the violations go out. When the letters went out, I looked for angry posts on Nextdoor. I then would comment on each one, giving them the first names of the 2 board members as the culprits, and told them to come to the next HOA meeting to appeal. It worked far better than I expected. During the next meeting, over 50 people showed up and called out those by name. It was glorious. During the open session, community members grilled those 2 for their poor policies, even though they did not make most of them. The VP, now president after the other one resigned, tried to defend them but ultimately failed. The 2 members were so distraught after the meeting that I told them maybe they should resign, and they both did. That was 2 more down, both of which were replaced by a couple who came to the same meeting and wanted to get rid of these rules. Finally, the board had been flipped to 4 out of 5 people wanting to get rid of all these dumb rules. The president, however, was still the same old angry, hateful man. He tried to add more rules to increase violation revenue, and we voted him down every time. He started to get annoyed, but stayed steadfast to the board. I tried a lot of tactics to get him to leave, and not much swayed him. A few months went by, and we started with a new management company. They had a much better style of property management and a website for looking through our community's records, as well as automated reports. When we got our first fines report, I hit pay dirt. The president's house appeared, and he owed around $10,000. Apparently, he had opened violations and had never paid, and the other management company hid it from the board for him, since he had been on the board for close to 7 years. So I looked into remedies. Since his fines were over $3,000, our bylaws stated that a majority vote of the board could start an HOA foreclosure on the home, which I still think is insane that HOAs can do that. So I got all the docs together and double-checked with the new management company that the fines were correct, which they confirmed. I called an emergency board session, presented the information, and 4 out of the 5 of us voted to start the foreclosure process. The president got angry, cursed, and left the meeting early. We were informed a few days later that the president had resigned, paid his fine, and put his house up for sale. While I am sad we couldn't force a foreclosure, at least he was off the board. I am currently president to this day, and I have reduced the fining policy to be a maximum of $400, and homeowners can appeal anytime they wish digitally. In addition, I have banned any grass fines until May, and trash can violations have been super relaxed. Moral of the story, never fine me $200, call me a stupid young kid, and expect not to lose your house. 5. Background. I worked for a company many years ago before I got into my current career. I worked at this company for 8 years, starting at 16 in high school. I worked my ass off daily and quickly climbed into a position of management and was very well liked and respected by anyone above me or below me. During my last year of employment, I had a new boss, Mary. She wasn't my main boss, she was a position beneath him. Her and I got along really well, but there were many instances of her stepping on my toes. One of my main duties that was exclusively my responsibility was maintaining the sales floor. I communicated with vendors and with buyers, I kept track of all product being distributed to our store, and planned accordingly. I planned all, creative, might I add, displays in the store and maintained them, ordered all needed products for displays, and handled all holiday distributions, displays, orders, etc. October rolls around and I start developing my holiday plan. Mary keeps a close eye on my plans and asks a lot of questions, but she doesn't get in my way. Thanksgiving is over and we're halfway done. My plan was a success so far, and I'm on track with the amount of product I've been bringing in and the amount of product left on the sales floor based on previous year's numbers and how much we're projected to sell of everything. It's a couple of weeks until Christmas and I'm in the middle of pulling last year's numbers to start my big Christmas order. Mary comes in and sees what I'm doing and says, "OP, don't worry about that. I'm gonna have Amy write the order." I am immediately confused and annoyed and ask her why she thinks it's a good idea to have Amy, the store receiver, write the order when I'm the person who has been doing it the entire time and has been working all the product, and I know what's been moving and what hasn't. She gives me a BS answer. Something like, "You've been doing so much and I just want to take some of the stress off of you." Instead of explaining to her that this will in fact increase my stress exponentially, I close out my tabs on the computer and smile and say, "Okay then, thanks." Amy writes the order, and after we get it in, I can tell by looking at the pallets that it's going to be a shit show. For example, way too much of a random product we don't need and aren't going to sell through until the next holiday season, at least, and not nearly enough of our fast movers and not enough to maintain current displays. Here comes my malicious compliance. Instead of breaking down these pallets into the designated area of the back room in an organized and intentional manner, like I have done with all of my previous orders every single year, I just leave it on the pallets, wrapped in shrink wrap. The product stays like that for days and I continue to ignore it. Eventually someone, maybe Amy, doubt it though, breaks it all down and there's stuff all over the place, and you can't find anything you need without moving stuff around. Next, I allowed all of my holiday displays to go to shit. Normally, I would have ordered to maintain them, but no, Mary wants to give me a break, so I let them burn. Mary and our big boss take note of this and scramble to figure things out themselves. Next, we're completely out of essentials that Amy didn't order enough of, and now it's too late and too close to the holiday for the warehouse to send us any more. Mary and Big Boss are dealing with angry customers who are taking their business elsewhere. Finally, the holidays are over, and our back room is full of stuff that's going to stay back here for quite a long time. All stuff left over from Amy's shitty order. Am I going to palletize and inventory and periodically work all the product? Nope, because Mary thinks I need a break. If I didn't make it clear enough, this was malicious compliance because I continue to do the rest of my normal job duties with 100% effort like always. I simply passed on the holiday duties to whoever else because that is what Mary wanted. Mary had a history of stepping on my toes and going over my head and making decisions on my behalf, and her telling me she wanted to take some of my stress away was her telling me, "I don't want you to do this very important task, so I'm going to have someone else do it who I think is more qualified." I don't really blame Amy, though. She just got thrown into a situation she couldn't handle. She wasn't equipped to handle the job, and I do feel bad that Mary put that responsibility on her, and Amy probably had to deal with the guilt of failing so badly. Mary, on the other hand, was chewed out once, as far as I know, by supervision when they paid a visit to the store and noted the horrible displays and empty shelves on holiday cooking essentials. That and lots of complaints from customers, too. I tried not to rub it in her face, but I'll admit, I let a few "I would have done it this way" comments slip. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge's Ice Cream, episode 219. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Please do press the like button before you go. That encourages YouTube to recommend it to other people. Alright, let's see. I don't believe there's any shoutouts for this video. My head's in a little bit of a whirl right now because I just recorded 20 revenge stories. The 4 videos that you've listened to over this past week, revenge-related ones, I did this all at once just because I started recording with revenge and I just went down the list of stories that I'd gotten permission to use. Then I did the other ones after that. Right, let's see. Let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. Today's question is, when you're having a bad day, what is the thing you do to make yourself feel better? In my case, it'll be whatever the most indulgent food I happen to have in the cupboard is. If I don't, then I might even, throw on some clothes and walk to a store that sells like a pizza or something, with a lot of cheese in it. And then I'll play video games and things. If I'm in the mood to hang out with people, I'll hang out with people. Or if not, then I'll just kind of like turn the Wi-Fi off and, you just turn the ringer off as well. Because sometimes you just need a little time to decompress alone. And I'd like to hear what you guys do, so please do leave your answers in a comment below. I'm going to head off now, rest my voice a bit, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.